The hospital was quiet at 6 in the morning. Only a few nurses walked through the halls, carrying trays and folders, moving softly so they would not wake the patients who were finally resting. Nora Bishop always arrived early. She liked the quiet. It gave her time to think before the day became loud with visitors, doctors, and machines that never stopped beeping. Room 214 was her first stop every morning. It had been that way for 4 months. Inside that room lay a soldier named Caleb Voss. He had been brought to the hospital after an explosion during his last mission overseas. The blast had left him with serious injuries, but the doctors said his body would heal. His mind was a different story. For weeks, he had screamed in his sleep. Then, slowly, the screaming stopped. But so did everything else. He stopped speaking. He stopped responding to his name. He simply lay in his bed, eyes open, but far away, as if his spirit had gone somewhere the doctors could not follow. The other nurses had given up hope. They still cared for him, of course, because that was their job, but they no longer expected anything from him. Some of them even spoke about him carelessly when they thought no one was listening, calling him a lost cause, a body without a mind. Nora never joined those conversations. She simply nodded, said nothing, and went back to her rounds. Every morning, she walked into his room, adjusted his pillow, checked his charts, and then did something the other nurses found strange. She talked to him. Not medical talk, not questions about his pain level or his appetite, but real conversations, the kind you would have with a friend. She told him about the weather outside, about her clumsy attempts at baking her grandmother's biscuits, about the terrible coffee in the break room. She spoke as if he could hear every word, even though there was no proof that he could. Dr. Ferris, the head physician on the ward, noticed her habit early on. He was a serious man who believed strongly in medical evidence and very little in anything else. One afternoon, he stopped her in the hallway outside Caleb's room. "You spend a lot of time in there," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "More than the treatment plan requires." "I know," Nora replied simply. "He hasn't shown any response to stimuli in over 2 months. No eye tracking, no reaction to sound, nothing that suggests awareness. You do understand that, don't you?" "I understand what the machines say," Nora said. "I'm not sure they say everything." Dr. Ferris sighed, the way people do when they think someone is being foolish but do not want to argue. "Be careful, Nurse Bishop. Getting emotionally attached to a patient who may never improve can affect your judgment. And frankly, it can affect your career. The hospital board is already asking questions about resources." Nora nodded politely, but she did not stop visiting Caleb. Some habits are not built on logic. They are built on something quieter, something harder to explain to a man holding a clipboard. As the weeks passed, Nora began reading to Caleb. She found an old cart of donated paperback books near the nurses' station, their pages soft and yellowed with age. She picked one at random one morning, a copy of Great Expectations, missing its front cover. She sat beside his bed and began reading aloud, doing different voices for each character, though she was not very good at it and often laughed at her own mistakes. She kept coming back to that same book, a little further each day, page by page, chapter by chapter. She never mentioned this reading time to anyone. It felt like a private thing between the two of them, even if he could not truly share in it. One morning, about 6 weeks into this routine, she noticed something small. As she read a line about a character's disappointment, she thought she saw Caleb's finger twitch slightly on the blanket. It was such a tiny movement that she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. She stared at his hand for a long moment, holding her breath, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did not. Still, she remembered that twitch. She held onto it the way someone holds onto a coin for good luck, tucking it away where no one else could take it from her or tell her it did not matter. Meanwhile, the hospital administration continued discussing Caleb's case in their monthly meetings. Since he had shown no measurable improvement, some board members suggested moving him to a long-term care facility outside the city, a place designed for patients who needed constant supervision but were not expected to recover. This would free up his hospital bed and reduce costs. Nora attended one of these meetings because her supervisor asked her to represent the nursing staff's perspective. She sat quietly through most of the discussion, listening to numbers, statistics, and budget concerns. When it was finally her turn to speak, she stood up. "I don't think he should be transferred yet," she said. Dr. Ferris, sitting near the front, did not even look up from his folder. Based on what evidence, Nurse Bishop? We need something measurable, not a feeling. She hesitated. She could not explain the finger twitch in a way that would satisfy a room full of doctors and administrators. She could not explain the quiet certainty she felt every morning when she walked into his room and spoke to him as though he understood every word. I don't have data, she admitted honestly, but I don't think giving up on him yet is right either. He deserves a little more time before we decide he's beyond help. There was a long silence in the room. Finally, one of the senior board members, an older woman who had worked at the hospital for over 20 years, spoke up. Let's give it 30 more days, she said. If there's no change, we move forward with the transfer. The decision was not made because anyone truly believed in Nora's instincts. It was simply easier and less expensive to wait a little longer before making the change. Still, Nora felt a small sense of relief. 30 more days meant 30 more mornings with her book, her stories, and her quiet hope. She continued her routine exactly as before. Every morning at 6, she walked into room 214, adjusted his pillow, checked his vital signs, and began talking. She told him about a burnt batch of biscuits she had made the night before. She complained about the cafeteria's mysterious green jello that nobody dared to eat. She read another chapter of Great Expectations, doing her clumsy character voices, unaware that each day was quietly building toward something she could not yet imagine. On the 22nd day of the 30-day period, Nora arrived at her usual time. The hallway was empty, the lights still dim from the night shift. She walked into Caleb's room, set her folder down, and reached for the book on the small table beside his bed. She opened to the page where she had left off and began reading aloud, her voice soft in the quiet room. She had read only a few sentences when a voice, rough and unused, interrupted her. "You're doing the voice wrong." The book slipped from her hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. For a moment, she could not move. She turned slowly toward the bed and found Caleb looking directly at her. His eyes, which had been distant and unfocused for months, were now clear and aware, tracking her every movement. "Caleb?" she whispered, hardly believing what she was seeing. "Nora," he said. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never told him her name. It was not written on the side of her badge that faced his bed. She always made sure of that, without even fully understanding why, as if some part of her had wanted to keep a piece of herself private from her patients. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I never told you. I always check my badge before I come in here. It shouldn't be visible from where you're lying." Caleb blinked slowly, as though even that small movement required great effort after so many months of stillness. "Fort Campbell," he said. 2019. You brought coffee to the wrong tent for 6 days in a row before you finally admitted you liked me. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Fort Campbell was a memory she had folded away and placed in the back of her mind, from a completely different chapter of her life. She had served there years earlier, before her nursing career had led her to this hospital. She remembered a cheerful young soldier with an easy laugh, someone who had made even the hardest days feel lighter. That soldier had been sent overseas on a new assignment, and their paths had never crossed again, until now. She stared at him, searching his face for the boy she remembered. The injuries had changed him. His jaw had been reconstructed after surgery, his face bore new scars, and his body had grown thinner from months of lying still. She had cared for him every single day, without ever realizing who he truly was. "You knew," she said slowly. "This whole time, you knew who I was, and you never said anything." "I couldn't," Caleb said, his voice strained but steady. "I could hear you. Every morning, I heard everything you said, but I couldn't make my voice work. It felt like being trapped behind glass. I could see you and hear you, but I couldn't reach you." His hand moved slightly on the blanket, reaching toward hers. His fingers were weak and uncoordinated after months without use, but he managed to find her hand and hold it. Nora did not cry, though she felt the urge rising in her chest. She simply held his hand, feeling the warmth return to it slowly, like a fire being carefully rebuilt from a single spark. At that moment, Dr. Ferris happened to walk past the open door, his clipboard in hand as usual. He stopped mid-step, staring into the room, his mouth opening to say something, before he realized he had no words ready for what he was seeing. Nora did not turn to look at him. She kept her eyes on Caleb, on the man who had finally found his way back after all those silent months. "Welcome back," she said softly. Caleb managed a small, tired smile. "Thank you for waiting." News of Caleb's recovery spread quickly through the hospital. Doctors who had once written him off as a lost cause now gathered to review his case with fresh interest. Physical therapists began working with him daily to rebuild his strength. Speech therapists helped him regain the fluency he had lost. Slowly, over the following weeks, Caleb grew stronger, both in body and in spirit. Nora continued visiting him every morning, though now their conversations were different. He could respond, laugh, and even tease her about her poor reading voices. They talked about the years that had passed since Fort Campbell, filling in the gaps of the life they had each lived separately. It was strange and wonderful to discover how much had changed, and yet how much had somehow stayed the same between them. Dr. Ferris, to his credit, eventually admitted that Nora's instincts had been right, even if he could not fully explain why. He adjusted his approach with future patients after that, paying closer attention to the quiet efforts of nurses who spent time with patients beyond what any chart required. Caleb's recovery was not instant or easy. There were difficult days, moments of frustration when his body did not move the way he wanted, and times when the weight of what he had been through settled heavily on him. But he was no longer alone in facing those days. Nora remained by his side, not simply as his nurse, but as someone who had waited patiently through the silence, believing that somewhere inside that stillness, he was still there. Months later, when Caleb was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, he asked Nora to walk with him to the front doors, instead of using the wheelchair the hospital required for departing patients. She agreed, staying close beside him as he took each careful step. At the entrance, he turned to her one last time before stepping outside. "You never gave up on me," he said, "even when everyone else did." "I couldn't," she replied simply. "Some people are worth waiting for." Caleb smiled, the kind of smile that comes from someone who has truly returned to himself after being lost for a long time. Together, they stepped out into the sunlight, leaving behind the quiet hospital room where, against all expectations, hope had quietly done its work.